Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Here at a window to the north, I talk about everything related to traveling, leading a nomadic life or being an expat. I strongly feel, and my opinion is, that travel enriches not only the lives of grown-ups but also of children, and therefore I feel that you should not be afraid of traveling with your children, even if they are so young that they do not remember it. The experience will still shape them, as do all experiences in their youngest informative years, so why wouldn't travel? But don't be afraid, just do it. It's easier said than done. So I thought today I'll give you a few tips of how to actually go about it. My oldest son is now 5, and before the pandemic he used to actually travel a lot. Him and I did a lot of solo travels as well. We went to Israel together, he's been to New York, he's been to Germany a couple of times a year, he's been to Finland, so he's really, gotten around, and it has never been really a big problem traveling with him. And now for the first time I'll be traveling with 2 kids. My second son, who is I suppose a pandemic baby, will be joining us in just 2 weeks. So I thought this was a good time to share some insights of how we actually do this. My first suggestion is that you need to, however, adjust your expectations. Kids are generally open-minded and curious to the world and to new experiences, but of course you can't travel with kids as you did before kids. That means you probably won't be able to eat in fancy restaurants, you probably won't be able to go to bars and nightclubs. Of course you need to adjust your travel itinerary according to having kids. That doesn't mean that you can only travel to Disneyland or only visit zoos, but you need to keep in mind and maybe also adjust a bit to what the kids are capable of. What I mean is, for example, I don't think when a kid throws a tantrum, for example, like a toddler throws a tantrum, I don't think that they do that to anger us. I think they're trying to, admittedly maybe not in the best way, communicate that something is wrong. So I feel that when children, particularly while traveling, throw a tantrum, it is easiest to kind of try to look behind the tantrum and try to see the message behind the mess, if you want. Could they be hungry? Could they be tired? Could they be overstimulated? There's a lot of new things happening, and they see and experience a lot of new things. Is that something that, have they just had enough for the day? And I think that is an expectation adjustment that we as parents and grown-ups need to do, but it is also something that we need to maybe look out for a little bit. What I mean is, try to keep their routine maybe relatively close to what it is at home when it comes to meals and sleep time, and just see and feel a bit for how your child feels to avoid big meltdowns. Let's get the first scary parts out of the way. I think most parents are particularly worried about flying with small children. So let me give you some tips here. My first tip would be, if your flight leaves early in the morning, consider as a service to yourself and your children to spend the night at the airport. See it as an investment into a peacefully started holiday or vacation. I feel, even though my kids wake up very early, they wake around 5, but our airport is also almost 2 hours actually car drive away. So I oftentimes feel if I have to be at the airport by 8 or earlier, then it is worth for me to consider sleeping at the airport so we can have a more relaxed start to our trip than if we had to leave the house here at 5 and start packing at 3, because particularly when I travel alone with them, I need to manage my own energy reserves and my own patience as well. So that is tip number 1. Another big thing that most people are afraid of, I believe, is that their baby or toddler will throw a tantrum or starts crying on the plane. We've all been in planes where babies have started screaming quite a bit. Usually this is because they can't regulate the pressure in their ears when the plane starts and lands. So my biggest suggestion, what has worked perfectly for us, is to have something with that they could suck on. If you're breastfeeding, breastfeed. If you don't do that, or you're not comfortable doing that, consider taking a bottle that they could drink and feed it to them during start and landing, or have a bottle with a little bit of juice, have some kind of juice that they could, because the swallowing motion that they do, the sucking and swallowing motion, will release the pressure in their ears, it will release the pain that they're feeling, and they'll stop screaming. Another option would of course be also maybe a pacifier if your child uses that. So there's some options that you could do to calm your child down. And then personally, in my experience, once start and landing are taken care of, babies particularly, but even toddlers, sleep super well on airplanes because of the rocking motion and the white noise of the airplane machine. So once you've survived the start and the landing, you should be fine. Another super important tip when it comes to releasing the pressure for start and landing is if your children, particularly babies and small toddlers, have a clogged nose when you are flying somewhere, really consider giving them some nose spray. It is an excruciating pain, particularly if you can't regulate the pressure yet, and that is also why they're screaming. So consider, if you know they're a bit sniffly, they have a clogged nose, consider giving them some nose spray to relieve them from that pain. Some practical tips when it comes to flying with small children, babies or toddlers, would be changing, for example, diapers. Most planes actually have a little diaper changing table in the restroom, so you should be able to do that. And if you are bottle feeding your baby, you should be able to get hot water from the stewardesses for your milk bottle, so you just need to take the powder to fix up the milk. Another good to know thing is you are allowed to take baby food in your hand luggage as long as it is in sealed containers. So bought baby food that has not been opened should be fine to get through security. Homemade self-cooked baby food is a different story. In most airlines, your baby will sit in your lap until the age of 1, which is of course nice because you save the fare for an extra plane ticket, but it could, depending on how long your flight be, also be relatively uncomfortable. Therefore, I would suggest to take a little pillow or a little blanket or something so you can make the two of you more comfortable. On the way to the plane, to the airport, and generally for your vacation, I would really strongly suggest taking a baby carrier. You can borrow baby strollers in most airports. However, I find, particularly when I've been traveling alone with my son, that a baby carrier was more practical because I had my hands free. I knew where he was, he couldn't run away. So I am a huge advocate of baby carriers generally, but particularly when you are traveling. Another super important thing as soon as your children are mobile is of course to have your contact details on them. Should for some reason they get lost, you get lost. However, should you guys be separated, I have a travel wristband for both my children where both parents' phone numbers are, and at least the older one knows that if he gets lost, to point or to communicate that that's the phone number where parents could be reached. If you are traveling with your children or your child alone and you are leaving the country, one suggestion would be, just to avoid problems at the border, to have a permission slip of the other parents. We usually don't do that when we're traveling to Germany, but when I took my son to Israel, I did get a permission slip of his father so that the authorities there knew that I'm not trying to kidnap my child. Train travel. When it comes to train travel, my suggestion is to have a closed compartment, because that way you can kind of, you know where your kids are within a closed space, and if they want to run around a bit and be a bit louder, if you are alone in that compartment, you won't be disturbing the other travelers as much. So now some trains in Europe at least also have family compartments where you can, for example, be a bit louder, where there's toys, where the kids will get little toys from the train personnel. I've even been in a train that had, a little slide and climbing contraption there so that the kids could keep themselves a little busy. So when it comes to train travel, I really like the app Omnio. I've just recently booked a train trip through Germany with them, because you not only can see all the trains available at that date and their price, but you can also pre-book seats and be sure that you have a seat ready for your family when traveling. Plus you can choose tiers where for an extra price you can even have super flexibility, so that without extra cost you could switch trains or train times during that day, which I personally find extra helpful when traveling with kids and not knowing that you might be in time, something might happen. It's always a little more difficult with kids. So I always like to plan a little bit of buffer. I will link them down below if that is something that you are interested in checking out. Pro tip for any kind of traveling for me always is to have some snacks available. I guess that's parenting hack number 1 anyways, but I feel it's even more important when traveling for one reason, because it might be that the kids, I have one son that eats almost anything, and I have my older son is very picky. He would survive on a diet of plain pasta and sweet corn if he could. And he has trouble with trying new food in places that we haven't been to. So I always have some snacks to ensure that at least there's something that he will be eating. Plus, snacks are a great way to keep kids occupied for a little while if you just stand in line and you really don't know how else to help yourself. I feel that a snack, a slice of apple or something will keep my kids occupied for a little bit. When it comes to food while traveling, like I said already, forget fancy restaurants. It's not fun for you sitting in a restaurant and getting upset with your children because maybe they won't behave as you think they should, and food is flying. I've spent some very, very sweaty restaurants visits trying to make my kids behave or hoping my kids would behave a little less like their age, which is my fault. Why would I expect from a 2-year-old to be able to behave like a grown-up in a restaurant? So that's a lesson that I learned the hard way, I suppose. So if possible, forget restaurant visits. I would recommend to always stay with kids in an accommodation where you can cook food, or buy some stuff in the grocery store and have a fun picnic either on the floor of your accommodation or in a park if the weather allows it. Which generally brings us to the topic of accommodation. I have stayed in hotels with my older son and it was never fun, let me tell you that. Like I said, my children wake very early. 4:30, 5 o'clock is usually when they wake up. There's nothing to do in the hotel. You're anxious that they don't wake up the other guests. Something might break. Hotels generally are usually not the most kids-friendly places. This is why I recommend either a vacation rental, I'll link a service down below, or to use hostels. Now, hostels don't only sell dorm rooms, they also have family rooms, are more family appropriate, I feel, because again, you don't need to be worried that some fancy furniture or anything gets damaged, but also because of the possibility of cooking that I had mentioned previously. I will also link a very good hostel website down below, Hostel World, which is a booking system for hostels that I can warmly recommend. Last but not least, let's talk about things to do. Generally, of course, there is some activities that maybe are not as child appropriate that you would do when you travel alone or as a grown-up, but I have made the experience that my children are also very interested in, for example, visiting museums and stuff like that. They have something and they do kind of take the information in their own with their own eyes, and they are interested in what they see. So I don't think that you only need to go visit zoos and Disneyland and stuff like that, although my older son and I do have the deal that we visit a zoo at least once in every destination so that he gets to experience new zoos. I suppose he's the kid that has visited the most zoos in his kindergarten class, but it is something that he really enjoys. And with every travel partner, be that a grown-up or a child, compromise during travel of course is important, and I feel that also that should also be true for kids who are your travel partner, and it should be fun and a good experience for them as well. And therefore, of course, everybody needs to be willing to make compromises and everybody needs to have their needs met to a certain extent. I know that my son, for example, we went to New York and we didn't even have to do anything. He was just so interested looking at the cars and taking in the city. So really, I just want to encourage you with this video to give travel with kids a try, no matter their age, and you might really be surprised. With that said, bye bye, see you next time.